Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit today about running your bike through the winter and basic maintenance that you can do to keep the bike in perfect working order and nice and smooth. One of the first things, and probably the most important thing, is to keep your chain clean and well lubricated. So as you're riding through the wet, you'll start to get moisture. If left unattended, then it will cause rust on your chain. So if you're out on a ride and the chain gets wet, what you'll want to do is dry the chain with a cloth and then just gently apply a lube all the way around the chain by pedaling backwards and just dripping the lube on until you've got a nice even coating. This will keep your chain from wearing out prematurely. It'll also keep it running nice and quietly and stop it from getting rusty. Moving on from that, one of the things you'll want to do is give your bike a bit of a wipe down after a wet ride, just to make sure that there's no moisture anywhere getting in where it shouldn't. And then what you'll want to do periodically, probably once a month, is you'll need to lubricate your hinge joints. You can do this by opening up the hinge, spraying a little bit of lubricant on the inside of the hinge there, anywhere where there's movement, and then closing the hinge back up again. You'll also want to do this for the hinge on the handlebar. Just spray a little bit of lubricant onto that, on the little interfaces there, and the same for your top, and then the same again down here on the main stem hinge. And then as you do that, you just want to open it and close it a few times to allow that lubricant to work its way in. Give it an open close like that, close it back up. And another thing that's worth checking every now and then is just to make sure that this isn't too tight or isn't too loose, so it can't just accidentally work its way out while you're riding your bike. So moving on to other checks on the bike, certain things that you should be checking on a weekly basis. Your tyre pressures need to be maintained. Normally on the side of the tyre wall, you'll see the indicated minimum and maximum pressure. So you can see there the minimum pressure should be 50, but you can run it as high as 70. Ideally, you want to be somewhere in between there, but you can experiment with the pressures. You just want to make sure that they're not underinflated or overinflated. That's a weekly check that you should be doing no matter what, whether it's in the winter or just in general. Also, keep an eye on your tyre tread to make sure that it's not running too low down. You should be able to clearly see the tread pattern on the tyre there. There should be no flat spots across the top of the tyre. If you notice that start to wear out or you start seeing cracking where there wasn't before or perishing, that might be an indicator that your tyre's worn out. Another thing to check for periodically is just to make sure that you've got no debris in there, so no thorns or stones or anything like that might cause you a bit of a puncture later on in the ride. So check that periodically. You don't want to be stranded at the side of the road in the wet, in the cold, waiting for a taxi to come and pick you up. Not an ideal situation to be in. Another thing that's very important if you're riding in the evening is to make sure that your lights always have sufficient battery life in them. Your rear lights here have 2 AAAs, so you want to make sure that you've either got some spares on you at all times, but just check the lights periodically to make sure they're still sufficiently bright. Your front one's obviously wired into the main battery, so that one should work regardless. It's always good just to make sure that it turns on when it should, just by holding the up button on the display when the bike is switched on. As you can see, this light's functioning normally, so everything's good. But again, not something you want to be caught out with at the end of a long day on your way home. Okay, so one of the checks you'll need to do, which is very important and you should be doing all year round anyway, this isn't specific to winter, is the function of your brakes. You need to make sure that the brakes are biting sufficiently. And as you squeeze the brake, what you want to have ideally is a brake that bites at about the halfway point. So you know you've got a good functioning, well-adjusted brake. If you find at any point that your brake's coming back too far, that normally means that your brake pads have worn down. So the brakes have some built-in adjusters to help you compensate for that. One of the adjusters you see here is a barrel adjuster, and you see that on the caliper. And as you wind that out, that will just take up any cable stretch that may have happened or any pad wear that may have happened to that side. And then on the other side of the brake, there is a fixed pad adjuster, which you can also see here, and that's adjustable with a 5mm Allen key. And this particular brake has a little grub screw on the top there, which secures that in place, so you'll need to back that off first, wind that in with a 5mm Allen key until it's just about to touch the rotor, and then screw the grub screw back in to secure it in place, and that stops it loosening off. Quite important that you do that. What you want to be looking for is you don't want to have either brake pads too close. So you should be able to see daylight on both sides of the pads, but it should be minimal. Just looking for a very, very small gap, and then that will just ensure that when you do spin the wheel, that there's no rubbing of the rotor on the brake pads. That just about covers it for the maintenance checks, and happy cycling over the winter.